Welcome back to part 2 of the road to recovery with my husband, Scott.
Good to see you all again.
So the injury that we're speaking about is a back injury that he sustained. But going back from, the injury we're talking about was in February of 2023. But previous to that, a couple of years earlier, when I had introduced him to strength training, we were chasing these large numbers in the gym. Scott sustained his first back injury. So tell us about your first back injury deadlifting.
So of the four main lifts that we had been training, bench press, overhead press, squat, and deadlift, I immediately fell in love with the deadlift.
And why was that?
Because I was good at it.
Because he was the best at it.
So again, just recapping from something we talked about before, I was chasing a 500-pound deadlift. And we were, in this one workout we were doing, it was a set of 5, and I had worked up to a 420-pound deadlift. So I was at the top, almost to the top of the 5th rep, and all of a sudden I just felt like somebody had jabbed a red hot poker into my lower back, and all I knew was that I had to get the weight to the ground as quickly as possible. What I didn't know was that I was going to follow that weight to the ground, and I basically am draped over the barbell, writhing in pain, and everybody is looking at me like, get up, because I think they thought it had just slipped out of my hand. But I was blind with pain, and something that I had never felt before.
So that was his first back injury, and it was definitely a muscular injury, and that probably debilitated and redirected training for about 4 to 6 weeks.
Indeed.
So we were able to get back into the gym relatively quickly and start doing something at the time. Could keep up blood flow, but it gave us a little bit of a redirect in terms of what we were chasing at that time. Is that fair to say?
It is, but it was how you handled my rehabilitation from that injury that established. I mean, I trusted you, of course, already, but that injury rehabilitation created implicit trust, and basically I knew at that point I could do whatever it was that you told me to do as my coach.
And we'll talk a little bit about how that later on injury differed from this one. That was a local muscular injury. So his symptoms were local and focused on his back. He did not have referred pain. He didn't have anything running down his legs. He didn't have any numbness or tingling. And it was a local muscular injury that we rehabbed through movement. But at the time, we had kind of come away from maybe the best thing to do right now. You know, he still had to go to work, he still had to perform at work, was not to chase numbers.
Correct.
But through the years, we would come back at that, and for Scott, his back injury kind of became his Achilles heel or his kryptonite. That was the one area of his body, would you agree, that you were going to re-aggravate?
Which is funny because it's weight training that actually saved my Achilles heel, but that's beside the point.
It is weight training that saved a lot of things, but the other thing is what would re-aggravate his back was not always weight training.
Correct.
Right, so in terms of a mechanism of injury, a lot of times when there's low back injuries, a low back injury will often occur when the body is flexed and rotated. So you'll hear sometimes somebody hurts their back lifting their child, or bending down to pick something up.
Bag of dog food.
Yep, those kinds of things. So that is going to be a common mechanism of injury, especially when you're not braced and prepared for it and not doing the movement correctly. Correct. So a lot of the times that you sustain back tweaks over the years, it may have been something like, putting on your boots or putting on, the pair of spikes that we needed to wear.
Yes.
So let's fast forward a little bit now. So again, strength training stays as our main staple of fitness.
Right.
During this time.
It does.
And, it's a few years later after you sustain the first injury, and I would say you would probably tweak your back in some way or another, maybe 2 or 3 times a year, a small tweak.
Nowhere near to the same extent. Nowhere near to the point where we had to take 4 to 6 weeks of rehabilitation. It may have been back off for a couple of days, but yeah, I would say that's pretty safe.
Yeah, back off. Rethink what we're doing, because again, we really had not dismissed these numbers, and Scott still wanted a 500-pound deadlift.
I did.
Is that fair to say?
That's
so
very
when the back was recovered and stuff, we would run it back up again.
Right.
So let's fast forward to what happened in February of 2022.
You want to talk about February of 2022 or December of February 2023
Sorry,
or
February
December.
2023. So go back to December. So there was a lead up. So this serious injury occurred in February of 2023.
Right.
But it was already kind of flared up starting in December. So let's go back to December of 2022. So almost 1 year ago.
So we had just come back from a fairly long trip. We had been gone from Vermont for a while. And when we got back to 18 to 20 inches of snow that had fallen. And it had fallen a while ago, so it had compressed and become pretty heavy. And anybody from the north knows exactly what I'm talking about. So the streets were plowed, the streets were clear. We got back to the driveway, and I realized I had to put it in four-wheel drive and pin it to win it, just to get in the driveway. And then I had to walk to the front of the house through the deep snow to grab the snow shovel to shovel back out to the car just so we could get everything out. And then I had to shovel to the shed where I had to get the snow blower. So there was a lot of flexion.
Should we talk about what I was doing during all of this?
You were unpacking and taking care of the dogs.
Was I waving to you out the window?
Indeed, she was. But there was a lot of flexion, there was a lot of rotation, and there was a lot of load that was taking place as I was getting rid of some very heavy, wet snow.
So your back just started hurting?
I was sore. I wouldn't say that I was injured, I was sore. But anybody who knows Gillian knows that when there are significant events on the calendar, like Christmas, a birthday, Halloween, she likes to do themed workouts. And we got home a couple of days before Christmas. So I think I had laid the foundation for some compromised movement just by moving all that snow.
And during that workout, what flared you up?
It was Christmas Day of 2022, and I was on the rowing machine, and the rower, kind of like the deadlift, was something that I was pretty good at. You know, I had good levers for it, and I was able to crank on that thing and do some pretty good time splits. So we were doing, I don't remember what the workout was, but I was on the rowing machine, and I was bent over getting ready to initiate the pulling cycle, and I felt a very distinct pain in my back that basically ended the workout for me.
It did. So that's an exercise that he had done thousands of times and had never hurt him before. But again, you sort of had a little bit of a weak link there.
Yep.
So like you could get injured doing something you do every single day.
Yep.
It happens all the time.
Yep.
So we had that injury, and that one kind of lasted for a little bit.
It did.
And we didn't get any respite from it because what happened was we had a very, very difficult winter that winter, which forced us every time we got ready to go outside to put on a ridiculous, extraordinary amount of gear, including, what are the spikes called that go on our...
Micro spikes or yak tracks, or if it was really bad and we were going up on the mountain, we would even put snowshoes on.
And try being bundled up in all that gear and, you know, putting this thing around your shoe, which puts you in a position of flexion and rotation. So just getting out of the house, the ground was uneven, the ground wasn't level, it's almost impossible not to slip and slide on the ice.
Correct.
So we had this injury that was aggravated, and we kind of pushed through, right?
We did.
Because at the time, it still displayed itself as a very muscular injury.
Correct.
It was not interfering in his ability to get his job done. You know, it hurt and stuff, and then it stopped hurting. He was able to sleep at night. He was able to do his work. The pain would actually dissipate during the workouts, and he would feel better during the workouts. And we did a fairly aggressive back rehab protocol during this time.
Correct.
That was part of our exercise routine.
It was.
But the pain, it never really completely went away.
No.
Is that right?
No, it was like a good friend. It's always with you.
Yep, always with us. So we are then going to fast forward to when the major injury happened. So
February, I had been building back slowly, and Gillian had gone on a trip with her sister and her mom. So I was home with the dogs over the weekend, and we had an event at work. It was a recruiting event. So I got ready that morning, and I noticed that something just felt very different. There was a lot of pain in my lower left leg, And
So I'm going to stop you for a second.
Okay.
Was there an event that precipitated that? Do you know if there was something you did the day before, something that you did, or did you just wake up that way?
So I did have a pretty big workout the day before. I remember it was very leg press centric.
Very high volume, lower body workout.
Correct.
Okay.
So, which I guess would have been important for me to include.
That's why I'm here.
That's why she's here. So anyway, the next day I got up, I got dressed for the recruiting event, you know, put on a really nice uniform, and I went in, and I remember talking to Gillian on the phone, and I told her that something just doesn't feel right, I can't get comfortable, but, you know, I was like, I'm gonna go upstairs now and just see if I can just push through. And I got up to where the event was being held, and everybody was asking me, are you okay? Because the color had drained from my face. I was constantly fidgeting. I was constantly shifting. I was leaning on everything I could. And there was just no way for me to get away from the pain. And eventually I just realized this was not going to happen. So I excused myself and I went back to the house. And that is the first time I have ever had an injury take me away from responsibilities at work.
Was that pain just in your back? Was it all the way down your leg?
It was
Describe the
referred pain. So there was definitely pain in my lower back, but my left leg, it felt sore, kind of wrapping around all the way down to my foot.
You came home.
I did. I came home and I couldn't get comfortable for the entire day. And, you know, I just thought, well, maybe I'll just sleep this off. And there was no sleep that night. There wasn't even anything remotely close to sleep. And, you know, my coach, my wife, you know, my best friend, she wasn't there. And I think the fact that I was alone dealing with this extreme amount of pain, it almost induced a panic that exacerbated the situation that much worse.
So we spoke on the phone. Fortunately, I was in a very loud place in a casino, which I think made things even worse. And I could hear the unsteadiness in his voice, and it was terrifying. I could hear his voice shaking and knew the level of pain that he was in. And I couldn't be there, and I couldn't do anything to take it away. And it's very, very difficult when you know that what you believe is injured is your back or something else, and you're feeling these sensations someplace else in your body, and you don't know how to make them go away.
Right.
So
my foot hurts, but my foot doesn't hurt.
So what happened during that night? So again, I am someplace else on a girls' trip with my mother and sister. He is alone at the house in the Vermont winter.
Yep. It was, you know, again, I tried absolutely everything I could to get comfortable. I tried, you know, putting something under my stomach to allow myself some sort of natural flexion to go to sleep.
Were you able
that
to
didn't
walk,
work.
sit, stand, any of those things?
I could move about the house, but it was with a great deal of pain. So I couldn't sit, I couldn't walk, I couldn't lay down. There was just no position that I could get in that took the pain away.
So it was like a systemic pain, like physically uncomfortable, nauseous.
It was beyond uncomfortable. It was terrible.
So we're actually going to give a shout out to a very, very close friend of ours, Patrick, who came to the rescue.
Patrick and his entire family.
And came to the rescue and brought you to the emergency room.
Patrick and his son took me to the emergency room because it took two of them, because, you know, I'm not exactly a small man. And I remember
So this was the next morning.
It was the very next morning. Gillian actually made the phone call to Patrick and said, Scott needs to go to the emergency room. I could not drive. There was no way that I was going to be able to drive myself. Not to mention I wasn't even in a right state to get behind the wheel of a vehicle, because I had just spent a very pain-filled, sleepless night. So they came and got me. They took me to the emergency room, and you know, it's difficult to admit, because, you know, I have this weird sense of pride, but I was bawling like a child in the intake. I couldn't speak. I could barely get my name out. And it was just, it's the worst pain I've ever felt in my life.
So I booked a flight and flew home. And what did they administer to you in the emergency room?
Well, there was a therapy dog, and I'll never forget the therapy dog because dogs make everything better. But it's the first time in my life that I've ever had morphine given to me, and I had 2 doses of morphine, and it was the only thing that enabled me to sleep. And God bless Patrick, he sat there for, I want to say it was 4 hours, and he was just there because in that moment I needed someone there. And while Gillian was on her way back to me, he filled that role. So the morphine also filled a pretty significant void too, but I knew it was only temporary, but it was exceptionally necessary.
Do you remember the protocol that you left the hospital with? Like, what did they do for you there?
It was pain management. That's all
Right.
it was.
Right.
There was no movement prescription.
It's like,
It was
follow up with your doctor.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, here's all the pain drugs you want. Whatever, we're just going to give it to you.
And away I went. And to be fair, I think that's all they had the capacity to do in that moment because it was a Sunday. And I wasn't the only show in town. I mean, there was a ward full of people that needed to be taken care of.
We are going to end this part here, and we will pick back up with you starting from coming home from the hospital and what the hours that followed and days that followed were like.
The long road to recovery.
Yep.